A couple is driving on the highway, Richard Dunn and his wife Claire. Richard is a novelist, and Claire is a vascular surgeon. They arrive at a lovely house in the countryside. As Claire gets out of the car, a blonde man in a superhero costume appears in the driver's seat. He talks with Richard about the hazards this place poses. Claire startles Richard, who acts cool, but he soon gets nervous at the sight of a dead raccoon, and Captain Excellent looks at him in a "I told you so" manner. Inside the house, Richard notices a hideously colorful couch and immediately deducts that this means trouble. That night, Claire gives a laptop as a present to Richard, but he is not so thrilled about it. He kind of feels a little pressure by his wife, and when asked, he says that he'll be fine. When Claire leaves for work, Richard tries to write, but systematically fails. Captain Excellent warns him to be careful while Richard prepares to ride his bicycle to town. Richard sees a young woman named Abby lighting up a trash bin. He puts the fire out at the expense of his jacket and then follows her. Abby surprises him and oils his squeaky wheels. She asks him why he follows her, and Richard answers that he is looking for a babysitter. Abby agrees to work for him. Later on, Richard attempts to concentrate to write, but the awful couch seems determined to prevent him from that. Richard goes to the pier and picks a funny fight with Captain Excellent. He returns home and fails to write again as Abby comes over for the supposed babysitting. Richard reveals a few things about himself and his wife. Abby asks him about the baby, and Richard informs her that there is no kid for her to watch. Abby assumes that she is wanted to watch the home, and Richard leaves. Abby then makes herself at home and fools around. She goes on to read a little from one of Richard's first book, The Renderer, and she likes it a little. Christopher, who has a crush on Abby, visits her at Richard's house and says that he loves her. Captain Excellent scolds Richard for asking Abby to babysit, and Richard asks him to boost him up with a power speech.
Surrounds you.
Returning home, Richard sees that Abby has made a soup for him. Richard is impressed for both the act and the taste. Abby then tells him about homemade soups being the best. According to Abby, her boyfriend Bryce is a chicken poop, and Richard reveals that he's trying to start a book with an extinct chicken breed as the protagonist. Slowly forming a friendship, Richard asks from Abby to come again next week. The next day, Richard asks Claire if they are happy, and Claire says they're fine. Richard freaks out a little when Claire cuts open his lobster for him. Abby reads the renderer and hangs out with Christopher in her room. Later that night, she has sex with Bryce, but in a way that shows he doesn't care for her. Richard spends some time with his wife for the weekend before she leaves him alone for a whole week. Richard attempts to write, but he is obsessed with the couch and decides to take it outside. He doesn't write, however, and instead does other stuff like making origami animals. Richard is interrupted again by Abby, who comes to babysit one more time. She gives him a fish her father caught and tells him she has read his book. Richard asks what she thought of it, and he ends up saying he hates the book. He shows her a bowl full of vegetables for her to be creative in the next soup, and before he leaves, Abby reveals that she loved his book. Richard goes for a beer and gets a little drunk while spilling out the story about his new book. Back at his place, Richard appreciates Abby's making soup and tells her that he is the last of his line and complains about his wife's work. Abby thinks Richard is coming on to her and hits him with a book and leaves. In the morning, Abby feels sorry for hitting Richard and hangs out with her buddy Christopher again. Richard wakes up and sees Claire in the house. Claire asks him about the couch and the soup, and Richard hears Captain Excellent telling him to stay calm. Claire wonders about the boxes lying around and sees more copies of Richard's first book. She goes to have a shower, and then Abby shows up. Richard tells her to leave at once, and Abby accuses him of hitting up on her last night. Richard is shocked to hear this, but then Claire notices her. Richard lies about Abby being a Girl Scout and shortly afterward tries in vain to begin his second novel. Claire asks him about the fish, and Richard says that he is planning to cook it and eat it. But that doesn't go well as Richard butchers up the dead fish. Claire leaves again in the morning, and Richard goes to apologize to Abby. He manages to patch things up with her and sets a new babysitting meeting on Wednesday. Abby comes, and Captain Excellent attempts to stop Richard from doing anything foolish. Richard and Abby enjoy a walk on the beach when all of a sudden she quotes from Richard's book and dives in the cold sea. Richard starts to worry, and when Abby comes out, he yells at her. The two of them walk back to Richard's house, and there Abby confides about her twin sister she challenged once to dive in the cold sea and got her killed. She has been carrying that burden all her life. Christopher feels betrayed that Abby shared that with Richard. Richard makes a couch out of the copies of Renderer and mentions a few of his working titles to Abby. Abby suggests using the title Paperman for his new book, and Richard writes it down. Afterwards, they both eat at a diner when Bryce comes, saying that they don't have a place to host the party. Richard proposes using his place, and Bryce agrees. Claire returns home and yells at Richard for putting the furniture outside and that he hasn't called her once this week. Captain Excellent urges Richard to tell Claire the truth. Richard asks Claire if they are both hiding their happiness, and Claire walks away, saying that he needs to grow up. Richard struggles with Captain Excellent to start that damn book already. No chance. That night, Abby shows Richard how to properly slice a fish. They cook dinner and exchange handmade gifts. Abby notices Christopher is watching them and ignores him. Richard preps up for the party. Bryce and his buddies come over, and soon more teenagers come, and then more and more. Richard proves to be the soul of the party, but he kind of exaggerates to fool his loneliness and in the end feels empty. Abby doesn't want to be with Bryce, who goes to hook up with another girl. Richard tells him about Abby, and after a small exchange of insults, Bryce punches Richard in the face. Abby shouts at Bryce to leave and abruptly ends the party. Abby stays with Richard that night. Richard tells her that he loves her, but in a father-daughter way. Abby recollects the time where her sister died because of her, and she starts crying. When Richard and Abby fall asleep, Christopher and Captain Excellent appear standing before them. They talk to each other, and it turns out that Christopher is Abby's imaginary friend, just like Captain Excellent is Richard's. After discussing the pros and cons of being an imaginary friend, Captain Excellent tells Christopher to flee as soon as the opportunity presents itself. They shake hands and they both vanish. In the morning, Claire comes along with Lucy and Peter. Claire starts hitting Richard and demands an explanation about all the mess and Abby's presence there. Richard says that Abby is the babysitter and Claire sends her away. Claire thinks that Richard has cheated on her, but Richard says that Abby is only a friend. The couple bickers, and Richard says that all he ever wanted is to have a relationship with a warm person and to be himself. He also says that he wanted a baby with Claire, but soon gets the answer that he is the baby. Feeling awkward, Lucy and Peter leave, and Claire shouts at Richard of being a loser. Richard yells back that he doesn't know what to do with his hands. Claire leaves, and Richard rides his bicycle to a remote place on the coast. Richard dismisses Captain Excellent, telling him that he is free now and that he doesn't need an imaginary friend anymore. He asks for the voice one last time. Captain Excellent says the words and then flies away. Richard is all alone now. Abby approaches Claire and tells her that she wished she had a father like Richard. Claire says nothing and drives away. At long last, Richard finds the name of his book protagonist that is no other than Richard. He visits Abby to tell her that he is leaving soon and gives her an origami swan. Abby kisses him softly on the lips. Richard nods and wipes a tear off her cheek before riding off for good. Abby feels content after so many years. She sees her imaginary friend, Christopher, having ended his existence, and Abby realizes now that it's time for her to move on. With baby steps, Richard makes it up with his wife. He brings the furniture back inside the house and begins anew, having given Abby hope and to himself a decent start for his new book, which pretty much talks about himself. Richard gets in the car with Claire next to him and tells her okay. A post-credits scene shows Captain Excellent waving first and then raising his middle finger at Richard. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. I'll be back with another interesting movie recap. Until then, take care.